Hello. Let's stand for the reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13, verses 24 to 37. But in those days following that distress, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, for the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard. Be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It is like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone. Watch. It's the word of God for the people of God. Well, I don't know about you. For me, growing up, our house was a place of welcome. With my dad working in rescue ministry and his heart for missions, we were always having people from the mission or other missionaries from far away in our home. And once we even had a lady who was running away from a fundamentalist type of religion, her life was in danger, and she stayed with us for a while. Well, Dad was not always the best at giving Mom notice enough about these dinners or people coming to stay. And I remember many times being quickly told to clean the living room, help me set the table, Mom running around the kitchen, asking my sisters for help with cooking her famous chicken divan or ham with pineapple casserole, which is another one of her favorites. But either way, we would quickly have to clean the house. And I always wondered why I was always told to make sure my bedroom was clean, because in those visits, there was rarely a tour of the house. And even if there was, my bedroom was kind of in the back. You go upstairs and down the hall and all the way down. Mine was the last bedroom. And I think on purpose, because it was always a mess. And, I was a typical all-American boy, and I didn't really see the point of having to all of a sudden clean my room on short notice, although, of course, it was my job to keep it normally. But I never understood. I hated cleaning my room, and I would walk in there sometimes, and I would be like, what is the point? They're not going to come up here. They're not going to see this. And it was such a mess, I would get overwhelmed. Well, I want to refer back at first to, this is the beginning of a series, 7-sermon week series in Advent. And I want to go back to Isaiah real quick in chapter 64, the chapters that were read. Pardon me. And the setting of Isaiah 64, 1-9, Israel has been expelled to Babylon, but Persia had defeated Babylon. So the people who remained in Jerusalem after it was destroyed by Babylon, they've found themselves with newfound privileges, freedoms under the Persians. Some were even able to return from Babylon to Jerusalem to visit. And so this passage by Isaiah is written in Isaiah saying he asked for the Lord to do three things. Tear open the heavens, come down, and make the mountains shake, and water boil. Now, this kind of power is sort of a weird thing to ask for, because, you would have an effect not only on nature if the power of the Lord came and the mountains shook. Obviously, that could cause great destruction of property. And also, if water boiled, you could be scalded. Not to mention the fear of God actually coming down. Remember now, the people of Israel had seen the power of God rumble on Mount Sinai when Moses was up there. So through the narrative and the storytelling of their day, they would have been told of the time when God did indeed make his appearance on Mount Sinai, and his glory made the mountain so fearsome they couldn't even approach it. And they knew what it was like to see God come, and they would recognize it when he came again. So for the prophet Isaiah in verse 9 to be asking for those three things in the midst of the state of Israel right at that point, with the temple destroyed, but hearing that the company was coming, that maybe friends from afar, or maybe even rulers, people that were high above them, were maybe coming from Jerusalem. It just seems a little bit weird. But also in verse 9, in the same passage with Isaiah, a second threefold request is made. And it's made, it says, do not be exceedingly angry. Do not remember our iniquity forever. Remember that we are your people. And so, if that's not a cry, kind of like from a kid whose parent is mad over a messy room, I don't know what else it might be. Perhaps the prophet is acknowledging how Israel has fallen into disrepair. Since the destruction of the temple, I can only imagine that even more of the Israelites may have broken off and started worshiping idols like Baal or other cultures around them. They may have been even more tempted to go and fall into worshiping false gods. Perhaps we are like one unclean. All of us. All of us is repeated in the passage in Isaiah in several of the verses, and it's kind of like he's saying, we dropped like a leaf, all of us. We are the work of your hand, all of us. Consider we are your people, all of us. That fourfold emphasis is on the totality of the people, all of us, reminds us that we are humans in this together, and the Israelites, they are all Israelites. And it just kind of reminds us, it's what a kid would say if, someone burst into their room and maybe it was mom or dad and the room was a mess and you're supposed to have been in there cleaning it. As mercy, almost, the prophet Isaiah is saying, please don't let your anger burn forever. Remember, we're your children, and calling back to that promise. The Israelites being the children of God. So, well, anyway, all this is leading to me, and why I went into all this detail. Here we are in Advent. We have a time that comes around every year, and it always seems like it's a time. Of course, it's a time that we look back. We can look back on the events that took place around the birth of Christ and the time leading up to that, and we celebrate that every year. But we've done this before, it kind of seems like. For those of us that have been in the church a number of years, it kind of seems like it's been there, done that. We've decorated the church before. We've lit candles. We've engaged in all the traditions that look back at what happened in Palestine all those years ago. It's also the start of a new Christian liturgical year, the calendar, and it can be a very busy time in the church. But we always seem to be surprised, almost like how quickly Advent rolled. Can it be Advent already? Now, maybe not in this year. 2020 has been kind of a hard year, and you may have noticed that people are putting out their Christmas decorations even last week before Thanksgiving. And normally I'm like, I don't do that, but people were just trying to put a little bit of a joy in their life and have something to look forward to at the end of this stressful and horrible year. So I partook in that and decorated the parsonage and, of course, our house in Omaha. But it's almost like as Advent finally comes up, especially with church planners and pastors, it's almost like sometimes, oh my goodness, it's Advent. Even though you may have been planning for it for months ahead, you can't believe it's already here, Well, now we're going to go to the Gospel of Mark. And of course, the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel reading, it includes a refrain to keep awake so that one will not miss the coming of the Son of Man. That's out of verse 33. The reading from Isaiah assures us that God will be recognizable when God comes. Just like the Israelites would have known what it was like when God and his power came down and the rumbling. We also have experienced God before, those signs of power, but also as one who does not remember iniquity forever, but turns away with forgiveness at all of us. So, kind of like in in Mark here, it's like a guard at the entrance of a military base. What's their number one job? Their very first job is to stay awake, and obviously observe who comes and who goes. Stay awake. And so the illustration that Jesus uses of a fig tree, now just 2 chapters earlier, he used an illustration of a fig tree, but it was of a fig tree that would not produce fruit, and it was figs, and was worth nothing but to be thrown into the fire. Well, now he uses a very familiar illustration of when the shoots get tender, or the buds on the branches of the fig tree get tender, and shoots start to appear, and leaves start to form. Everybody in Israel, all the early readers of this passage would have recognized that as a sign, a clear sign, predictable. That means summer is starting, And so Jesus uses that as a reminder and uses that illustration, and he's saying, I'm about to tell you guys some signs that are going to happen, and you'll know when you see these signs that the end is near. Now, of course, Jesus is very clearly, he is saying that his return is imminent. He's clearly saying that this will happen within a generation. He says this generation will not pass until these things are seen. But obviously he's referring to, for those of us that have the advantage of history to look back, only 40 years later, in 70 AD, the temple is destroyed by the Roman emperor, and his stepson, actually, Titus, comes in and levels the temple. But Jesus is also using that prophecy to describe what's about to happen to him, the true temple of God. You see, Jesus is far better of an example of the temple. The temple itself, in all of its glory, it failed. It failed to do what it was supposed to do, was to point all people to God, not just the Jews. So here we have an announcement of Jesus, much like Isaiah, telling us that company is coming. So here in Advent, we do look back. We look back to the events of leading up to Jesus' birth. But we, as modern Christians, we have the duty to stay awake also and be on the lookout for the return of Christ, which is coming in the future. So it's an interesting season, and we're going to be looking at how this week, to boil it all down, it's our duty as believers to look back on, to be ready for the imminent return of our King, who is Jesus. And I just have to ask us, I ask myself, and I have to ask you guys, are you ready? If Jesus showed up tonight or today, would you be okay with what he found? If he showed up, would you be okay with the condition of the life and the witness that you are living for him? If he showed up, kind of like a parent bursting into a room that's supposed to have been clean, I want us to spend some time this week just kind of thinking, what is it in our life? Is there sin or things that need to be confessed or a relationship that needs to be healed in order for our witness to be in good standing? So maybe it is time we clean up our lives, because I'm just like everybody else. I know right now if Christ were to walk into my life and in return, I feel like I would have a lot of, I'm sorry I didn't get that quite done the way you wanted, but remember, you love me, and smile big. But let's work together over these next few weeks and study, and then hopefully we get to clean up our lives, clean up our witness in this Advent season, because this place is a mess. Blessings.